Welcome, everyone, to the third session on the transformation of Baghdad by Baha'u'lláh, how Baha'u'lláh recreated the Bábí community of Baghdad. The last two sessions were setting the context of this spiritual and material transformation, really. This session is the return of Baha'u'lláh to Baghdad from Sulaymaniyeh and his work of community transformation. And I just want to make sure that you can see my screen. So since I've muted everyone, if there could be a thumbs up to see if my screen is correctly sharing. Wonderful. So last week, we ended with an exploration of the struggles that were simultaneous with Baha'u'llah's transformation of the Bábí community of Baghdad, because there were two periods of opposition that are simultaneous to the story we're going to start telling now. And these two periods are in 1861, approximately 4 years after Baha'u'lláh returns to Baghdad, and in 1862, 1863, shortly before the third exile is decreed. But today we're going to begin with Baha'u'llah's return to Baghdad after his 2 years of self-imposed exile in Iraqi Kurdistan, on the 19th of March, 1856, to be precise. From the moment the Holy Family found out where Baha'u'lláh was, they had been waiting for his return. Asiye Hanum had sewn a coat for her beloved husband out of a precious red cloth, tirmi, which she had especially set aside from her marriage treasures for this purpose. On the 19th of March, 1856, Asiye Hanum, Abdul Baha, and Bahiye Hanum sat breathlessly as they heard a step. Although outwardly he looked like a dervish, they instantly recognized Baha'u'lláh. The moment they'd been impatiently waiting for 2 long years had finally arrived. The entire family was submerged in an ocean of joy. The children clung to their father, Abdul Baha holding Baha'u'llah's hand tightly, as if he never intended to let go ever again, and to let his father out of his sight. While the family of Baha'u'lláh experienced great happiness during this time, Baha'u'lláh had returned to find the Bábí community in shambles. His work of spiritual regeneration awaited. Baha'u'llah's heartbreak at the state of his community after his 2-year absence was immense. He found the Bábí community in shambles, destroyed by Mirza Yahya and Sayyid Muhammad's 2 years of ravages, and it had become irrelevant in the larger community of Baghdad. No one spoke of Bábís. Baha'u'lláh stated, "We found no more than a handful of souls, faint and dispirited, nay, utterly lost and dead. The cause of God had ceased to be on anyone's lips, nor was any heart receptive to its message." The situation broke Baha'u'llah's heart, and at first he refused to leave the Most Great House except occasionally to meet his friends in Baghdad and in Casamine. Added to this, shortly after his return in 1856, a great tribulation befell the Bábí community. Dayan, whose name means one who rewards, was a peerless Bábí. He had been praised by both the Bab and Baha'u'lláh as the point of the Bayan, the repository of the knowledge of God, the third letter to believe in him whom God shall make manifest, the repository of the trust of God, and the treasury of the pearls of his knowledge. and the one whom the Bab had taught the hidden and preserved knowledge. Mirza Yahya felt immensely threatened by Dayan, and shortly after meeting with Baha'u'llah in Baghdad, Dayan was murdered in nearby Kazimine. Dayan's martyrdom filled Baha'u'llah with an immeasurable sadness. Added to Dayan's cruel martyrdom, the situation of the Bábí community in Baghdad broke Baha'u'llah's heart. Further. So how exactly did Baha'u'llah manage this feat of transforming this community spiritually? It was broken. It was humiliated. The community was dejected. It was destroyed. It was broken. It was abased. It was not respected anymore. It was brought to its knees, and it was emptied of spirituality. No one wanted to hear from it. No one wanted to become a Bábí. This is the part in the talk that's going to explore the concept of spiritual transformation from 4 angles. And not only the heart and soul of spiritual transformation, but also the 3 ways that Baha'u'llah transformed the community, the 3 tools that he had at his disposal. And the remainder of the talk is going to be organized to study these one by one. First, we're going to begin with a quote by Baha'u'llah shortly after he returns to Baghdad in the Kitáb-i-Iqán in 1861. So a little bit over 3 years after his return, about spiritual transformation. That is a perfect explanation of what actually Baha'u'llah did in Baghdad. Is it not the object of every revelation to effect a transformation in the whole character of mankind, a transformation that shall manifest itself both outwardly and inwardly, that shall affect both its inner life and external conditions? These elements of transformation outlined by Baha'u'llah in this quote from the Kitáb-i-Iqán, the Book of Certitude, describe the transformation that Baha'u'llah effected on the community of Baghdad between the 19th of March, 1856 and the 22nd of April, 1863. Both inwardly and outwardly, both in the community's inner life and in its external conditions. We're going to look at 3 elements of Baha'u'llah's inner and outer transformation of the Bábí community of Baghdad that was manifested both in its inner spiritual life and in its outer physical life, how they behaved, how they were perceived, how they were respected, and we're going to study them separately through the rest of the talk. The first element of transformation is, of course, Baha'u'llah's revelation. The second element is Baha'u'llah's person, his presence, his guidance, his deeds, his words, who he was. And the third element is the most great house. We're going to start with the first element of transformation, the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Of all the elements of spiritual transformation which Baha'u'llah wielded in his complete transformation of the Bábí community of Baghdad, none could be more powerful than the creative, regenerative, transformative, life-giving word of God, his revelation, his alive revelation, his constant revelation. This is a quote from Shoghi Effendi in God Passes By. The complete transformation which the written and spoken word of Baha'u'llah had effected in the outlook and character of his companions was equaled by the burning devotion which his love had kindled in their souls. And in this quote, we see these two elements of Baha'u'llah's love and manifestation of his person, and Baha'u'llah's spoken and written word, his revelation. A copious rain. The foundation and distinguishing elements of the spiritual transformation of the Bábí community of Baghdad can be found in Baha'u'llah's prolific output of revelation during these years, one of several periods in his life where the word of God streamed out of Baha'u'llah with so much intensity daily. Another period is after his poisoning in 1867, 1868 in Edirne, and then during his time at Mazra in Bahji, he had a period of revelation that was very intense like this as well. This is how Baha'u'llah described it. After our arrival in Baghdad, we revealed as a copious rain, by the aid of God and his divine grace and mercy, our verses, and sent them to various parts of the world. Shoghi Effendi in God Passes By explains the power of the revelation of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad, stating that from the city of Baghdad there radiated wave after wave, a power, a radiance, and a glory which insensibly reanimated a languishing faith, sorely stricken, sinking into obscurity, threatened with oblivion. From it were diffused day and night, and with ever-increasing energy, the first emanations of a revelation which in its scope, its copiousness, its driving force, and the volume and variety of its literature was destined to excel that of the Bab himself. Baha'u'llah's output of revelation between 1856 and 1863 was so prolific in terms of volume that it could not all be transcribed. Nabil, the historian, estimated that Baha'u'llah revealed the equivalent of the Quran each day in verses that were never taken down or copied. Over 7 years, Baha'u'llah ordered Mirza Agha Jan, not once, not twice, not even 10 times, countless times, to cast hundreds of thousands of verses into the waters of the Tigris River, the one you see here on this slide, comforting his reluctant amanuensis by telling him, no one is to be found at this time worthy to hear these melodies. It is safe to say, given what we've just learned, that the majority of the revelation of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad between 1856 and 1863 is lost to us forever, not taken down or washed away in the waters of the river, or revealed with such astounding speed. The only real witness to it was Baha'u'llah himself. But there is another aspect to this revelation that transformed the Bábí community, and it's the breadth of Baha'u'llah's revelation that was so astonishing. Its variety. Baha'u'llah revealed books, epistles, exhortations, commentaries, dissertations, prophecies, prayers, odes, poems, and tablets. Each new revelation of Baha'u'llah in that 7-year period of productivity served to further lift the veil of his majesty and grandeur. Here are some of the works that were revealed during this period. The first is a beloved one, the hidden words, Kalimat-i Maknuni, in 1857, 1858. About a year or two after his return to Baghdad, Baha'u'lláh revealed his first major work while pacing along the banks of the river Tigris, or in the Most Great House. The Hidden Words is a masterpiece of spiritual gems, clothed, as Baha'u'lláh says, in the garment of brevity, and revealed partly in Arabic and partly in Persian. On this slide, you can see the banks of the Tigris, and you can see an illuminated hidden word. Certain passages of the hidden words were revealed at one time and recorded in a single tablet, and the rest were revealed at different times and were added to the first revelation. The Hidden Words is a book of prophecy according to Baha'u'lláh. It is the famed Book of Fatimah from Islamic tradition. Fatimah, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, was grieving the loss of her father, the Prophet Muhammad, and the angel Gabriel came down and spoke to her words of comfort, which were called the Book of Fatimah, which was lost until Baha'u'lláh re-revealed it as the Hidden Words. Another work revealed during this time is the Seven Valleys, Haft Vadi. Some years after returning from Kurdistan, we do not have an exact date for this book. Baha'u'lláh revealed one of his greatest mystical treatises, the Seven Valleys, in answer to questions posed to him by Sheikh Muhyiddin of Qaniqain. In the Seven Valleys, Baha'u'lláh describes the 7 stages of the true seeker's soul, which he has to traverse from the physical worlds to the spiritual realms of nearness to God, a mystical process the Sufis were well familiar with. But Baha'u'lláh clarified the profound meaning and significance of each of the stages. The image here is an illuminated page from the manuscript, The Conference of Birds by Attar of Nishapur, which describes the 7 stages of a seeker's journey towards God. Sufis were familiar with these 7 stages, of course, but Baha'u'lláh greatly expanded on them and made them so clear. Chihar Vadi is the 4 Valleys, another mystical treatise, revealed for Sheikh Abdul Rahman Karkuki, a learned Sufi whom Baha'u'lláh had met in Sulaymaniyeh, and who was already deeply devoted to Baha'u'lláh. The 4 Valleys describes the journey of the spiritual traveler to his ultimate goal and addresses interpretations of religious doctrines and scripture, speaks about mysticism, knowledge, and divine creation, exhorting men to education, goodly character, and divine virtues. And of course, the work that brought us together is Gems of Divine Mysteries, Jawahirul Asrar, which you studied together. And Mona reached out and asked me if I could give historical context for the revelation of this work that you learn to love and understand better. Baha'u'lláh revealed Gems of Divine Mysteries, a lengthy Arabic epistle, in response to a question from Sayyid Yusuf Sidi Esfahani, a Shia cleric in Iraq, who had asked how the Promised One could have appeared as the Bab in different human form. So Baha'u'lláh revealed Gems of Divine Mysteries the very day he received the letter. And when the work was revealed and received, and when he had read it, Sayyid Yusuf Sidi Esfahani immediately recognized Baha'u'llah's station, a perfect example of the transformative power of Baha'u'llah's revelation. And of course, the Kitáb-i-Iqán. This is an illuminated page of the opening of the Kitáb-i-Iqán, the masterpiece of Baha'u'llah's revelation in Baghdad. revealed in response to 4 questions from Haji Mirza Sayyid Muhammad, one of the maternal uncles of the Bab, who had as yet not recognized the station of his nephew. The entirety of the 200-page Kitáb-i-Iqán was revealed in Persian in the space of 48 hours around mid-January 1861 and fully dispelled every doubt in Haji Mirza Sayyid Muhammad's mind. In this matchless example of Persian prose, Baha'u'lláh proclaims the existence of the unknowable, the one inaccessible God, the source of all revelation. He expounds on progressive revelation and the oneness of all past messengers of God. He recounts their lives, their sufferings, their messages, and the commonalities between them. Baha'u'lláh also sheds light on obscure passages and terms from the New Testament, from the Quran, from the Hadiths, and he outlines prerequisites for seekers of truth, demonstrating the significance of the Bab's revelation and the heroism of his disciples. What you see here is an example of Baha'u'llah's amanuensis, Mirza Agha Jan's revelation writing. They look less like Persian or Arabic than they do like almost thin hairs dropped on a page. He developed a shorthand that only he knew what meant. And when he would recopy, he would often ask Baha'u'lláh, oh, what was this? And Baha'u'lláh would immediately re-enter the state of revelation, know exactly, even if it was mid-word, he would know what came after. Muhammad Karim was a Bábí from Shiraz, and he had the bounty of being present while both the Bab and Baha'u'lláh were revealing verses. Muhammad Karim affirmed that Baha'u'llah's revelation alone was his most powerful claim to greatness. And he said, had Baha'u'lláh no other claim to greatness, this were sufficient in the eyes of the world and its people, that he produced such verses as have streamed this day from his pen. The effect of this constant outpouring of revelation from Baha'u'lláh on the Bábí community of Baghdad was transformative. His writings were dispersed through the Bábí community of not only Iraq, but Iran, and Baha'u'lláh progressively introduced and incorporated new teachings, truly Baha'i teachings, in the Bábí teachings of the Bab. So it's almost like a spiritual transfusion. There began to affect an imperceptible shift from Bábí to Baha'i as the years went on in Baghdad, as their understanding of the teachings, constantly clarified by Baha'u'llah's revelation, but also by his deeds and his words, which we're going to look at next, transcended what had been promulgated by the Bab. Baha'u'lláh was very, very progressively preparing them for his declaration. Part 10, element of transformation number 2, the person of Baha'u'lláh. The recreation of the Bábí community of Baghdad between 1856 and 1863, Baha'u'llah's leadership of the Bábí community gave them vision, strengthened their faith, bolstered their confidence and the confidence of the community, expanded their horizons, transformed its character. In the span of just 7 years, Baha'u'lláh infused into the community and its member a loftier set of principles and ethics than the already lofty sets of principles and ethics of the Bab, which he poured forth in the Bayan. Baha'u'lláh himself exemplified all of these attributes, this stainless character, this lofty sense of integrity in his own person and through his words and deeds. Baha'u'lláh held the believers to such a high standard that he once declared, "It would be more acceptable in my sight for a person to harm one of my own sons or relatives than inflict injury upon any soul." Baha'u'lláh's standards for integrity were so high that once a Baghdad official came to him with a puzzling, delicate situation. He confided to Baha'u'lláh that he had not punished a criminal because the criminal claimed that he was a believer in Baha'u'lláh. And you see in this how Baha'u'lláh had already transformed the community, because this official comes to him. The reputation of Baha'u'lláh in the community is so high that he hasn't punished someone because he says he believes in Baha'u'lláh. So you see this transformation I've been speaking about has already taken effect. So Baha'u'lláh made the situation perfectly clear for the official. Only those who followed his example were his followers, and told him that even if Mirza Musa, his full brother, was found guilty of an offense, I would be pleased and appreciate your action were you to bind his hands and cast him into the river to drown, and refuse to consider the intercession of anyone on his behalf. The Bábís in Baha'u'llah's entourage were altered and uplifted in their understanding and inspired by the example of Baha'u'lláh. They strove with all their might to sanctify and purify their souls to conform with the will of God. They made pacts with each other to admonish and correct each other's behavior when they strayed from the standards of Baha'u'lláh. It was a recreated community. Clear guidance is what Baha'u'lláh gave the community. Clear guidance on teachings. And these were infused into the collective community. They were far above and beyond what the Bab had revealed. They were more. They were purer. They were a higher standard of integrity. Baha'is were absolutely forbidden to engage in any political activity, to band in factions, to hold secret meetings. They were defined by a strict principle of nonviolence and obedience to authority. Rebellion, retaliation, discord, dispute, backbiting were banned. These were the foundational virtues of the new Bábí community of Baghdad: godliness, kindness, humility, piety, honesty, spirituality, chastity, faithfulness, justice, tolerance, friendliness, harmony, and unity. Baha'u'lláh encouraged the study of the arts and sciences and created a code of ethics that included the virtues of self-sacrifice and detachment, patience, steadfastness, and resignation to the will of God. After years of turmoil and conflict and shame, the Bábí community was imbued with peace and tranquility. Complete spiritual transformation. Aside from transforming its character by his own example, Baha'u'lláh deepened and encouraged and educated the Bábí community. He explained, he interpreted, he refreshed and reaffirmed the fundamental teachings of the Bab that had been neglected, obscured, and misrepresented by Mirza Yahya and Sayyid Muhammad. As a result, the spiritual life and health of the Bábí community and its members were profoundly revived. The people of Baghdad. This is an early 20th century photograph of the inside of a bazaar in Baghdad. Baha'u'llah's exile in Baghdad was different from the remainder of his other three exiles. We've already seen that two of these differences were that the other exiles were unfair. They were retaliation against him, whereas it made sense that after the attempted assassination on the life of the Shah, Baha'u'lláh needed to leave the soil of Persia. The other main difference is that Baha'u'lláh chose to go to Baghdad. It was his choice. The destination was his choice. He had been offered asylum in Russia, but declined, preferring to go to Baghdad. One of the most astounding differences between Baha'u'llah's exile in Baghdad and his exile in Istanbul, Edirne, Akka, most great prison, is The hours and hours every day that Baha'u'lláh associated with the people of Baghdad, his love for them, his love for the Kurds in Iraq who first saw the glimmerings of his majesty, and the wonderful time he spent with them in Sulaymaniyeh, his openness at receiving people in the most great house or visiting with them in cafes, revealing important works for these people. This is a closeness that we will never see again in the earthly life of Baha'u'lláh. This is what Baha'u'lláh himself had to say about his time in Baghdad and with the inhabitants of Baghdad. We associated with people, whether they were in the community or outside, whether acquaintances or strangers, whether they came from far or near. And this is the story of Baha'u'lláh and the coffee houses of Baghdad. One of the absolutely unique features of Baha'u'llah's life in Baghdad compared to his life everywhere else from Tehran all the way to Akka was his outgoing social habits. Baghdad was the only city where Baha'u'llah lived during his ministry, where he frequented coffee shops twice a day for an hour and a half in the morning and in the afternoon, returning to the most great house in between for rest, something to which Baha'u'llah himself testifies. During the days of Baghdad, we ourselves used to visit the coffee house and meet with everyone. Now, these images here, this one and this one and the next one are all illustrations of Ottoman coffee houses. When Baha'u'llah was in a coffee house, his aim was to teach, spread, and propagate the Bábí faith, and so much of his time was spent speaking to people. The coffee houses were a central part of Baha'u'llah's life because he never visited people in their own homes. The notables, ulamas, and magistrates of Baghdad who wished to enter his presence could either go to the biruni, the reception room of the most great house, or find the coffee shop that Baha'u'llah was in and meet him there. Baha'u'llah often frequented the coffee house of Sayyid Habib the Arab, an imposing man with a white beard, and the Kad Khuda, boroughhead of old Baghdad. Baha'u'llah would call Sayyid Habib over and offer him tea, and this became such a habit that Sayyid Habib considered any day when he was not in the presence of Baha'u'llah to be a wasted day. You see the transformative effect of the person of Baha'u'llah on people who are not Baha'i. Baha'u'llah also visited Abdallah's coffee house in Jassar in East Baghdad. Whichever coffee house Baha'u'llah patronized would inevitably become so crowded by the notables of Baghdad that the owner prospered. Some of these coffee house owners became so attached to Baha'u'llah that his departure from Baghdad deeply affected them. A man by the name of Hamd abandoned his coffee house and left the city. And Sayyid Habib the Arab, with a nice imposing white beard, never again drank tea or set foot in his coffee house. She knows that I like her. This is an early 20th century photograph of the people of Baghdad in honor of this story. All the people living in the neighborhood of the most great house received gifts from Baha'u'llah, particularly the poor, the disabled, and the orphans. Whenever Baha'u'llah walked in his neighborhood and came upon someone needy, he showered his bounties on them. There was an old woman, around 80 years old, who lived in a ruined house. Every day around the time when Baha'u'llah would go to the coffee shop, she would wait for him by the road. And every day, Baha'u'llah would stop and inquire about her health and give her money, and she would kiss his hands. She wanted to kiss Baha'u'llah's face, but she was too short. So Baha'u'llah would bend down so she could reach his cheeks. Speaking about this charming woman, Baha'u'llah would say, "She knows that I like her. That is why she likes me." When Baha'u'llah left Baghdad, he made arrangements so the old woman would receive a daily allowance until she died. And then this very significant gesture, we can see the love that Baha'u'lláh felt for all the people of Baghdad and how important he was in their lives, but more so the effect he had on everyone around him. This is the story of Baha'u'llah's bakery. During these last years in Baghdad, Baha'u'lláh often visited a farm outside the city called Mazra-e-Vashash, which his beloved faithful brother Mirza Musa rented for him. When he came back from the Mazra-e-Vashash, Nabil would always wait for Baha'u'lláh on the street of the Most Great House. Baha'u'lláh would often stop by the house of Nabuki on the other side of the street as the Most Great House, where Nabil and several other Bábís lived, including a merchant from Shiraz and a carpenter. Near the house of Nabuki, on the same side of the street opposite the Most Great House, was a house that Baha'u'lláh also often visited. It was the house of Shatir Reza, and it housed Baha'u'llah's bakery. Shatir Reza had set up the bakery with a grinding mill that Baha'u'lláh had purchased, and he and his brother supplied the whole Bábí community of Baghdad, roughly 30 to 40 people, with all the bread they needed, free of charge. The father of the two bakers was a 90-year-old Agha Muhammad Sadiq, who came from a town nearby Yazd. Many of his stories about the behavior of Muslim divines made Baha'u'lláh smile, which made the old man so very happy, as he would raise his hands in thanksgiving for the privilege of having brought joy to Baha'u'lláh. This bakery, a very short 2-line note in the biography of Baha'u'lláh in Hand of the Cause, Mr. Balyuzi's biography of the King of Glory. It's very short, of course, but it's very significant because the metaphor of bread in the Bible is, of course, the bread from heaven, the manna, the revelation of God. And here we see Baha'u'lláh community building for real, providing physical bread on top of the revelation, the spiritual sustenance he is giving the Bábí community. If anyone today did this for a community, it would be social action. What Baha'u'lláh was doing between 1856 and 1863 was indeed spiritual, social action, rebuilding community. This section, I'm going to end with 2 portraits of people who were transformed by Baha'u'lláh, completely transformed. The first is Nabil-i-Akbar. Nabil-i-Akbar was originally named Mullah Muhammad Qaini, and Baha'u'lláh surnamed him Nabil-i-Akbar. He was widely acknowledged as one of the most learned men of Persia. Why? Why was Nabil-i-Akbar so widely acknowledged? Well, I'm going to address this on the 31st of December with a talk dedicated to his life, but I'm going to give you the short version here. Nabil-i-Akbar got, basically, in today's parlance, 2 PhDs, one in philosophy and one in theology. And both of his doctorates almost, because he studied for 5 years under one of the most famous philosophers from Sabzevar in Iran for 5 years. And then he went to Najaf and he got basically a doctorate in Islamic theology from the most respected mujtahid of his time, who only granted the rank of mujtahid to 3 people in his life, including Nabil-i-Akbar. So by the time he was done, he was famous, very, very famous. And he had these degrees from Shia philosophers and Shia mujtahids and Shia theologians, and he thought like them, and he was just basically unbeatable in debate. So 6 years after his declaration, and after having obtained his 2nd degree and a rank of mujtahid in Najaf, he traveled to Baghdad for the express purpose of meeting Baha'u'lláh, of whom he had heard so much of. But he was himself one of the most learned men of Persia, so his ego was quite healthy and developed. Baha'u'lláh, he arrived sometime in 1859 to the Most Great House, and Baha'u'lláh welcomed him warmly and bestowed on him the honor of staying in the Most Great House as his guest, something he did not often do. One afternoon, Nabil saw the very, very famous, highly respected Bábí, Mullah Sadiq Ibn Qadas, kneel to Baha'u'lláh as Baha'u'lláh was entering the Biruni of the Most Great House. And this was a big problem for Nabil Akbar, because Mullah Sadiq was very famous, and he saw him trying to kneel and in such a state of spiritual bliss. He just did not understand why someone so revered would do this to Baha'u'lláh, whom he didn't really know much about. He just heard about him, and he was coming to visit him in Baghdad. So after this incident, the more closely Nabil Akbar watched Baha'u'lláh, the less he was impressed. He began feeling superior to Baha'u'lláh. So he started behaving quite arrogantly. He took the seat of honor in every meeting. He spoke without letting others speak. And one day, Baha'u'lláh was serving tea to his guests when a question was asked. Nabil Akbar began answering, but Baha'u'lláh kept making short comments on the subject. And after a while, Baha'u'lláh took over the explanation. And his explanations were so profound, Nabil Akbar was overtaken by fear, while at the same time, he was spellbound. His eyes had finally been opened. In another meeting in Kazimine, a few kilometers away, Baha'u'lláh spoke about the mysteries and the origin of creation, and new worlds began opening before Nabil Akbar. Every word out of Baha'u'llah's mouth was like a gem to him, and anything else he had ever studied in his life with all these great scholars, so widely respected, all of that just seemed like child's play to him. Nabil Akbar could not contain his curiosity and wrote to Baha'u'lláh asking him about his station. Abdul Baha delivered the letter to his father, and the next day Baha'u'lláh responded with a tablet that ended Nabil Akbar's search for truth. He had found him whom God shall make manifest. He recognized the station of Baha'u'lláh. Nabil Akbar wrote a second tablet to Baha'u'lláh, humbly acknowledging him as the supreme manifestation of God and begging him to guide his steps in service. Baha'u'lláh asked Nabil Akbar to go teach the faith in Persia, which he did, and to learn more about Nabil Akbar's exploits. Please let me know if you would like me to invite you to the talk on the 31st of December, and leave your email in the chat box and I will invite you. The second story of transformation is the story of the transformation of the mother of the Bab. The Bab revealed the Qayyumul Asma, his first work, in 40 days, starting on the 23rd of May, 1844, and ending when the last letter of the living, Qudus, found him independently. In the Qayyumul Asma, the Bab addresses his beloved mother, Fatimeh Begum, with the following words: "Recognize then the station of thy son, who is none other than the mighty word of God." 12 years after the Bab's declarations and 6 years after his martyrdom, his beloved mother, Fatimeh Begum, with whom he had enjoyed an extraordinarily close bond since childhood, she still had not recognized him as a manifestation of God. In 1854, the cruel and spiteful attitude of her hostile relatives after the loss of her only son prompted her to leave Persia for good and settle in Najaf, Iraq, around 145 kilometers from Baghdad. She lived a life of meditation and prayer until Baha'u'lláh returned from Sulaymaniyeh in March 1856. Sometime after his return, and we do not know exactly when, Baha'u'lláh sent 2 devoted Babis who knew Fatimeh Begum very, very well from Shiraz, a man and a woman, Haji Javad-i Karbilai, and the wife of Haji Abdul Majid Shirazi, sent them to Fatimeh Begum to instruct her on the principles of the Babi faith and acquaint her with her son's station as a manifestation of God. The most insurmountable obstacle for Fatimeh Begum in recognizing the Bábí religion was the behavior of Mirza Yahya and Sayyid Muhammad, who had stained the name of the Bab by both marrying his second wife, Fatimeh Khanum. In a tablet, Baha'u'llah stated that Fatimeh Begum asked, how could the people, convinced of his claim to be the promised one of Islam, the Qa'im, those who have given their allegiance to him, dishonor his wife? The situation caused Baha'u'llah to be overtaken by sadness, but eventually, towards the end of her life, Fatimeh Begum, because of Baha'u'llah's kindness towards her and his attention to her and his delegating these Babis to care for her and teach her, she ended by overcoming these obstacles and recognized the priceless treasure that was her son. She accepted the Bab as a manifestation of God. She embraced the truth of the Babi faith, and she died a believer, fully aware of the station of her blessed son. In Baha'u'llah's words, praised be to God, the mother of that blessed being came to believe at the end. I believe we have time for, let me just ask you, let's see here. How do you feel? Do you want to hear about the third element of transformation, the most great house, tonight? Or would you like us to keep this for December 2nd?
Tonight.
Okay, great.
I'm game for tonight.
Wonderful. I like keeping them together as well. Okay. So part 11, element of transformation, number 3, the most great house. One second. Sometime near the end of Baha'u'llah's seclusion in Kurdistan, and we don't exactly know which year, the Holy Family moved into Mirza Musa's home, which was the house of a man called Sulaymani Ghanam, located in Old Baghdad on the western bank of the Tigris River. This was the home that Baha'u'llah returned to, and he would later bestow upon it the title Beit-i-Azam, the most great house, elevate it as a holy place and make it a center for Baha'i pilgrimage with a specified rite of pilgrimage. From the time of Baha'u'llah's return from Kurdistan on the 19th of March, 1856, to the moment he stepped out of this house for the last time in his life on the 22nd of April, 1863, 7 years, 1 month, and 4 days later, Baha'u'llah would live in only one house. This has several important implications. Number 1, for 7 years, every day, the most great house was the place where Baha'u'llah lived, ate, breathed, was present, could be found. For 7 straight years, every holy writing revealed by Baha'u'llah was revealed in part or in full in this blessed house, the most great house. For 7 years, anyone, Babis, Kurds from Sulaymaniyeh, citizens of Baghdad, important people of Baghdad, everyone always knew where to find Baha'u'llah because he never moved. For 7 years, the most great house became the center for all the activities of the Babi community of Baghdad. Babi visitors from Iran, lectures, classes, celebrations. For 7 years, the most great house was the center for pilgrimage for all Babis to attain the presence of Baha'u'llah. This is a floor plan of the external part of the house, not the Andaruni, just the Biruni area. You see the room of Baha'u'lláh with its 9 windows on each side. You see the inner courtyard that people came in, and it's sort of the courtyard is where you stand when this famous photo is taken. This one. You see these little windows at the top here. Let me see if I can. These 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. These are the ones that are here in the floor plan. These 9 windows on either side. So in Persian homes, there was always an external side of the house, the biruni, the men's quarters, which is what this floor plan is, and an andaruni, a private side of the house where the women could be unveiled and only the men of the house, the children, the husband, could see them. And guests were never allowed in the andaruni. The biruni was where the receptions were, where guests came, where messages were received, where receptions were held. And so in the morning, Baha'u'lláh would have tea with his family in the private side of the house. And then in the afternoon when he came, he would either go to the private side of the house or the public side of the house and meet people. But people would wait for him there after work, and they would spend time with him until 2 hours after sunset. So it was really almost like a Baha'i center. People came there a lot to be in his presence, and he was there also a lot, spending time with people. One of Baha'u'llah's visitors who had a chance to visit this Baha'u'llah's famous biruni was a prince from Kazimine who declared to his friends that he planned on building a duplicate of Baha'u'llah's biruni in his own home. When Baha'u'llah heard the story, he smiled and remarked, "He may well succeed in reproducing outwardly the exact counterpart of this low-roofed room made of mud and straw with its diminutive garden. What of Baha'u'llah's ability? What of his ability to open it onto it, the spiritual doors leading to the hidden worlds of God?" This most great house brought together disparate people, and simply being in the house lifted people's spirit and brightened their mood. Zain al-Abidin Khan, an exiled Persian nobleman, often said, "I cannot explain it, I do not know what it is, but whenever I feel gloomy and depressed, I have only to go to the house of Baha'u'lláh to have my spirits uplifted." The devout Kurds of Suleymaniye. These are Kurds from the early 20th century. They are here mostly for the way that they dress. It's a very Kurdish way of Kurdish traditional clothing that would have been not so different from the time of Baha'u'lláh. After Baha'u'llah's return to Baghdad in 1856, his devoted Kurdish friends did not forget what he had told them. And soon many of them started arriving in Baghdad with the words Darvish Muhammad or House of Mirza Musa the Bábí on their lips. The religious leaders of Baghdad were simply astonished. They witnessed throngs of Kurdish ulama and Sufi of historically rival orders gathering together to flock to the Most Great House. And soon these religious leaders too began to come to the Most Great House to find out what it was all about. And what it was all about was the magnetic presence of Baha'u'lláh, of course. Baha'u'lláh answered all of these people's questions to their complete satisfaction, and the religious leaders of Baghdad became some of Baha'u'llah's earliest admirers. Their unconditional recognition of Baha'u'llah's majesty, in turn, piqued the curiosity of poets, of mystics, of intellectuals, notables of Baghdad, who would later sing the praises of Baha'u'lláh far and wide. Baghdad notables and Persian princes. These are exiled Persian princes, I think in Baghdad, but in later years. Iranian Bábís who visited Baha'u'lláh, the Most Great House, returned to Iran with countless written and oral testimonies of Baha'u'llah's rising power and glory. Among the most noteworthy Bábí visitors and disciples who associated with Baha'u'llah during his years in Baghdad were 4 of the Bab's cousins, his maternal uncle Haji Mirza Sayyid Muhammad, Princess Shamsi Jihan, the granddaughter of Fateh Ali Shah, Nabil, the historian, the king and the beloved of martyrs, the father of Munir Khanum, Abdul Baha's future wife, and Zainul Mukharrabin, an esteemed and well-known mujtahid. But many non-Bábí visitors also attained the presence of Baha'u'lláh in the Most Great House with great reverence, including a large number of notables of Baghdad, celebrated ulamas, well-known calligraphers, famous pashas, and viziers who had been exiled because of their opposition to the government, exiled Persian princes, the controller of customs, and Ottoman government officials. All of these regular and faithful visitors spread not only locally, but also internationally abroad the praises of Baha'u'lláh. And Baha'u'llah's fame grew to the point where new arrivals to Baghdad were soon drawn into the circle of Baha'u'llah's acquaintances. In the 19th century, these Oriental courts in places like Tehran, Istanbul, and Baghdad were snake pits, really. People who were malcontent or intrigue lovers, everybody had their own axe to grind. And although Baha'u'lláh was kind and welcoming to all, he did not tolerate scheming at all. Because he was so well respected and had the Bábí community and he had the ear of all these important people, people wanted to come and get him to support their causes, put his prestige and his reputation on their side. And Baha'u'lláh, always harshly condemned brash and politically ambitious visitors who tried to gain his support for their causes. Of course, with all these meetings of Baha'u'lláh, there would be testimonies of meeting him. People would write about it, would speak about it wherever they went. And many left anecdotes. This is probably the most powerful testimony of his majestic bearing and his impact on people who laid eyes on him or who were in the Most Great House to listen to him in that space where he was always to be found, where he could always be consulted, where he could always help, where he could always listen and give his opinion. But people would remember so many moments with Baha'u'lláh. Bystanders would recall their luck at seeing him in a bazaar. Muslims would remember him praying in their mosque. Beggars or the indigent would praise his generosity. Visitors, princes and paupers would recall entering the Most Great House and sitting at his feet. Shopkeepers and artisans would pride themselves on providing the Most Great House with what they needed to live, the food or the supplies. And even Baha'u'llah's adversaries would, even after he had long left Baghdad, describe the power of his utterance and the warmth of his love and his hospitality, that both confused and disarmed them. Next week, we will begin the end of this series of talks with the prestige of Baha'u'lláh and the Baha'i faith. And that is our presentation for today. I think we still have some time to have questions if there are any. I hope you enjoyed this.
Thanks, Violetta. Very nice. I have a question.
Yes.
At any time in Baghdad, did he meet with women?
Well, Shamsi Jihan was mentioned by Mr. Balyuzi as one of the people who met Baha'u'lláh. From what I've read, I have two historical anecdotes from published Baha'i authors about this. One is when Nabil visited, shortly after all of these events where we're talking about, Baha'u'lláh sent Nabil on a proclamation journey to Persia, and he went to Shiraz and he met with Khadija Begum, and Khadija Begum sat behind a curtain. And Tahirih, just a few years before, was in Baha'u'llah's house and she met with men, but she met from behind a curtain. So everywhere in public, I don't think there were any women in these coffee shops that we were talking about. There is that old lady on the side of the street, and that story comes from Hand of the Cause, Mr. Balyuzi. And she not only spoke privately to Baha'u'lláh, but she also kissed his hands and his cheek. So perhaps the fact that she was elderly means that she could be this. You know, there's an exception for that, obviously, for children also. But I would assume, given the period of time, if women did meet with Baha'u'llah in the Most Great House, it would have to be behind a curtain.
Okay.
I'm unclear when the next meeting's going to be.
We are going to have the next meeting at the old Zoom address, because everybody has that one. But we will have to make sure that Baghdad makes someone host at first, so that I can record there.
Okay.
And when is it going to be, is my question.
We're skipping a week. It's going to be in 2 weeks, on the
Okay.
2nd of December.
Okay.
For Thanksgiving.
Very interesting, and lots of lovely research on the House of Baha'u'llah.
Thank you.
I found that very interesting.
Oh, thank you so much. Very kind.
Mm-hmm.
I know we've gone a little bit over our allotted hour.
I'm sorry, did everybody put their email address into the chat so I can, because I'm trying to photograph it. I can't. I'm just taking a quick picture of it, so I have them now.
If you want, I can do better than that. I can email it to you.
I love it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Also, your commentary on the Revelation is very, very enlightening. It's nice to have it rounded off like that. So
yeah,
that was a very intense period with the mysticism. It seems like quite high on the.
Yes, we're going to revisit. We're going to revisit this in the next talk. It's going to be even more intense. The mysticism is going to be so developed in the next talk. Okay, I got everything right now.
Okay.
I got everybody's email. I'm going to email that to Mona.
So you did know that occasionally you froze. I don't know if other people heard it, but occasionally there would be a slight freeze. And then
yeah, I think that our Wi-Fi router is on its last legs, so we're gonna have to.
Okay, all right, okay, just.
Does everybody who's on this know that Violetta is in Congo? Okay, so thank you.
We're supposed to have a great internet connection, but I guess it's sort of not behaving well right now.
For God's sake,
the revelation, it's kind of astounding to realize how much was not recorded, how much was not set down.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and also to see, I guess you spent quite 6 months maybe studying Gems of Divine Mysteries together, and to see Gems of Divine Mysteries in that context of one of the few things we're lucky enough that were set down, as well as those works that were revealed before Baha'u'llah declared, and sort of the special sort of fragrance around those early works, the early light of his revelation, what he chose to bestow upon humanity, what he chose to let us keep before he declared, before these big tablets like Ishrakat and Bisharat, and before the Kitáb-i-Iqán, and before the summons of the Lord of Hosts, and before all those big things. And what did Baha'u'llah? It was very curated. I think it's very important for us to realize that this was definitely his choice. Gems of Divine Mysteries made the cut. Baha'u'llah decided that humanity deserved it, and humanity could understand it and could attain to it and was deserving of it. See, and it changes, our perspective. If we look at it from that perspective, what did Baha'u'llah allow us to keep rather than what do we have? No, what did he allow us to have from that period? And then just think of Baghdad, this place that has suffered. And then think of, in its waters, all of these sheets and sheets of papers where all of this was washed off, and it just went into the waters of the Tigris.
One of the things that we couldn't help but understand when we went through Gems was what must have been tremendously frustrating for Baha'u'llah himself, because he would give all of these wonderful revelatory pronouncements and then say, but in fact, I'm not allowed to tell you more. because God had not yet given him the time to make his manifestation apparent.
Yeah.
But there was always this little sentence that if I could only tell you more, you would understand. And then he stops there.
Yeah, and I think we see a parallel to that in the Bible when Jesus tells his followers, I have more to say to you. You know, so there is a tradition of that. And perhaps we can see that little sentence added at the end, you know, I wish I could tell you more, or I have more to say to you, as a manifestation of the greater covenant, that God will not abandon us. If the manifestation says, I have something more to say to you, means that God is going to be there for us, where this is going to keep on going. He has our backs. The manifestation says, I have more to say to you, but I can't right now. I wish I could tell you more, but I can't right now. That's almost like the covenant in action, the greater covenant in action.
Thank you, Violetta.
I have one question.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You had mentioned at the beginning of this talk today about the word of God, the copious rain. That in those small books, like the Gems of Divine Mystery, there's also a book called The Call of the Divine Beloved. In there, there's a few passages, and it's called The Clouds of the Realms Above. Rashi. Is that what you're referring to when you say copious rain?
Oh, now the Rashi Amma is an amazing. It's one of the first revelations of Baha'u'lláh, and he actually revealed it in the Siyat Chal.
Oh,
and the Rashi Amma are the clouds from the rain from the clouds above, or the clouds from the realms above, the clouds from the realms above. And Amma is a Persian word for a cloud that is there and then it's gone. It comes and disappears. It's here and it's kind of like, and it's often used in mysticism. And so what's really interesting is that one of the earliest revelations that we have of Baha'u'lláh is the Rashi Amma, which is a poem about the revelation of God to him in the Siyat Chal. And one of the very earliest things we have of Abdul Baha when he was 24 years old is the last selection in the 26 selections that the House of Justice released in 2021 for his anniversary. The very last one, which is a poem. It's the end of his commentary on I was a priceless treasure. And it is also a poem. So they're both poems. And you can find both of those on the, you can listen to the Rashi Amma subtitled in English, but recited in Persian at the Utterance Project. I'm going to give you the link right now. But it was not what I was referring to in terms of the copious rain. The copious rain is an expression that Baha'u'lláh used to explain how much he revealed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Some of our friends are still muted if they have something to contribute.
Yep, please do.
I've often wondered how much of that Revelation 2 that was written down that we have lost because of the various machinations of people who came later.
You mean how much of the revelation we've lost because of the covenant breakers directly?
You know, I remember the story of the old woman in Akka, for instance, who had a lot of the original writings of Baha'u'lláh, who was throwing them in the fire.
Oh, I see.
You know, things like that.
Okay, yeah. Well, that is a question that will be very difficult to answer, of course.
Of course,
It does represent I think it represents probably less of a portion than the thousands of verses that were revealed in Sulaymaniyah that we will never know, the thousands of verses that were revealed why Baha'u'lláh was being exiled between Baghdad and Samsun on the way to Istanbul, the hundreds of thousands of verses that Baha'u'lláh himself says that he washed away in the Tigris, the equivalent of one Quran a day that wasn't taken down. I think that what Baha'u'lláh chose not to leave is much more significant in volume. And also you have to remember that there are 2 or 3 more copious rain episodes where his revelation is streaming down like a tropical monsoon and people don't have the time to write it down. those are much more important volume than one angry old lady burning verses from Baha'u'lláh. We've lost less from them than we have from Baha'u'llah's own decision. Say the power of this revelation, the power of this dispensation is how much we have that is revealed. We have thousands of verses, thousands. We have, I don't know how many times the equivalent of the Bible or the Quran, you know, and I think that we have to worship what we have. We have to learn how to use it. We have to be grateful for it and know that we are protected in what was lost by the covenant. So in the chat, I've put the links for the Rash-e-Amma in Persian and the poem by Abdul Baha, if you want to hear what they sound like. I like the fact that the manifestation of God revealed poems. That is something extraordinary. We're very blessed.
Thank you so much for everything.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I have all the emails, so I'm gonna
see you after Thanksgiving.
Okay, see you after Thanksgiving.
Lovely
Have a lovely
to see
evening, everyone,
faces.
and then you'll get an email now since you're on the email list, and you'll get an email from Mona with a link if you want to share it with your friends. Bye, everyone. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Allahu Akbar.
Hello.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.